Get security up here. Right now. Richard Sterling's voice cracked through the glass boardroom like a whip. Every conversation died instantly. The hum of the city 30 floors below seemed to vanish. 2 security guards turned toward the doorway as dozens of executives followed his glare. Standing beside a catering cart was Maya Williams, a black maid in a Navy housekeeping uniform, one hand still resting on a silver coffee pot. The polished marble floor reflected the chandelier light across her worn shoes. "Sir, I only needed 30 seconds, Maya said quietly. Richard let out a cold laugh. 30 seconds? You are a maid. This meeting moves more money in an hour than you will see in 10 lifetimes. A few people around the table smirked. Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Heat crept up Maya's neck, but she did not look away. On the giant screen behind Richard, charts and projections glowed in shades of blue and gold. The merger agreement sat open in front of him. A deal worth billions. Cameras waited outside. Reporters filled the lobby downstairs. Everything was ready. Everything except one thing. Maya swallowed. "If you sign that document today, your company is going to lose everything." Silence slammed into the room. The air felt heavier. Richard stared at her for a long second, then slowly stood. His tailored gray suit caught the morning light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" he asked. Maya's fingers tightened around a thin folder she had been hiding against her side. "I know exactly who you are, sir." The answer made several executives exchange nervous glances. Richard's jaw tightened. "Escort her out." The guards started forward. Maya did not move. Outside the windows, a helicopter drifted across the skyline. Inside, the only sound was the sharp click of expensive shoes against marble. "Sir," Maya said again, her voice steady despite the pressure closing around her. Page 73. Section 4. The Liability Transfer Clause. Richard stopped. Just for a fraction of a second. Then he laughed. "Now she is giving legal advice." The room joined him. Maya felt every stare, every judgment, every assumption pressing down on her. A maid. A cleaner. Someone invisible. Someone who should never have spoken. Yet her eyes never left the contract. One of the attorneys sitting near the end of the table frowned. His hand slowly drifted toward the document. Richard noticed. "Do not encourage this nonsense," he snapped. The attorney hesitated. Then he glanced at Maya. Something about her certainty unsettled him. The guards reached her side. One extended a hand toward the door. Maya nodded softly. "I understand." She turned. The folder slipped slightly from beneath her arm. Several papers spilled across the marble floor. The nearest executive rolled his eyes. "What now?" But then the attorney's expression changed. Completely. His gaze locked onto one of the documents lying face up beneath the chandelier light. His face strained of color. His chair scraped backwards so hard it echoed across the room. Richard frowned. "What is it?" The attorney bent down, picked up the page with trembling fingers, and stared at the name printed across the top. Then he looked directly at Maya. The room fell silent. Even the guards stopped moving. Richard's confidence began to crack. "Why are you looking at her like that?" he demanded. The attorney swallowed hard. "Sir?" His voice barely came out. He looked back at the page, then at Maya again. "I think you need to see this." Richard stepped forward and grabbed the document from his hand. The moment his eyes landed on the credentials at the top, the color vanished from his face. Richard's fingers tightened around the page. The laughter vanished. The soft hum of the projector suddenly sounded deafening in the silence. Across the top of the document, beneath Maya Williams's name, were credentials that should not have belonged to a woman pushing a housekeeping cart through hotel corridors. Richard read the first line once. Then again. His jaw locked. The attorney stepped closer. "Sir, that is her." Maya stood motionless near the door while every eye in the room shifted toward her. A moment ago they had seen a maid. Now uncertainty rippled through the boardroom like a shockwave. Richard looked up slowly. This cannot be real. Maya did not answer. The attorney cleared his throat. 5 years ago, she led the risk review team that uncovered the Harrison Capital fraud case. Several executives froze. One actually lowered his glasses. Another stopped typing. Harrison Capital had collapsed after an $800 million deception was exposed. The story had dominated financial news for months. Richard stared at Maya. You expect me to believe that? Maya met his gaze for the first time. No, sir. I expect you to read page 3. The attorney flipped through the folder. His hands moved faster now. Sweat glistened on his forehead beneath the bright conference lights. The pages rustled through the silent room. Then he stopped. His expression darkened. Richard. The billionaire hated hearing his first name spoken that way. Not as a leader. Not as a man in control. But as someone about to hear bad news. Outside the glass walls, reporters continued gathering in the plaza below. Camera crews were setting up. The merger announcement was less than an hour away. Everything was moving toward a historic victory. Yet suddenly the room felt unstable. The attorney slid another document across the table. She is right about the liability clause. A pulse flickered in Richard's temple. What? If this deal goes through exactly as written, Sterling Technologies absorbs every legal exposure. The room erupted into whispers. Maya remained silent. Richard grabbed the contract and scanned the section himself. His eyes raced across the language. The polished confidence that had carried him through thousands of negotiations began to crack. Tiny cracks. Barely visible. But there. One executive leaned forward. Are you saying we missed this? Nobody answered. The attorney looked at Maya. How did you find it? Her fingers brushed the edge of the folder. The same way I found the last one. The answer sent another wave through the room. Richard could feel control slipping. He hated it. Especially because it was happening in front of people who followed him without question. Minutes earlier he had ordered security to remove her. Now half the room was waiting for her next sentence. One of the guards quietly stepped back. Another lowered his radio. Nobody wanted to touch her anymore. Richard noticed. That bothered him more than he expected. If you knew this, he said carefully, why are you working as a maid? The question hung in the air. For the first time, something shifted behind Maya's eyes. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Pain. Deep and old. She looked away toward the city skyline glowing beyond the windows. Because life happened. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody smirked. The answer landed harder than any speech. The attorney opened another page. Then suddenly his face strained of color again. Worse than before. His chair scraped backward. Richard looked up. Now what? The attorney swallowed. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Sir. He pointed to a paragraph buried near the end of the merger package. This is not just a bad deal. The room went completely still. Then what is it? Richard asked. The attorney looked directly at Maya. Then back at Richard. I think someone inside this company helped put it there. The words hit the room like shattered glass. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for a pen. Richard Sterling stared at the attorney, searching for some sign that this was an exaggeration. There was none. The attorney's hand remained frozen over the contract. Someone inside the company? Richard asked. His voice sounded different now. Tighter. The attorney nodded once. This clause could not have survived every review stage by accident. A cold silence spread across the boardroom. The giant screen still displayed smiling merger projections, but suddenly they looked fake. Executives shifted in their chairs. One loosened his tie. Another avoided eye contact completely. Maya noticed all of it. The nervous glances. The stiff shoulders. The tiny signs people gave off when fear arrived. Richard turned sharply toward the table. Nobody leaves this room. The command echoed across the glass walls. Outside, reporters continued gathering below. Camera flashes flickered through the windows like distant lightning. Inside, the air felt trapped. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Richard looked back at Maya. "If you know something, say it." The room instantly shifted toward her again. Hours earlier, she had been invisible. Now the most powerful people in the building were waiting for her next word. Maya glanced at the contract. Then at the executives surrounding the table. "I do not know who changed it," she said quietly. Disappointment flashed across several faces. Then she added, "But I know when it happened." The silence returned even harder. Richard's eyes narrowed. "How?" Maya stepped forward. The security guards instinctively moved aside. Nobody told them to. They simply did. She pointed toward a sequence of digital approval records displayed on one of the legal review pages. "Because somebody made a mistake." Several executives leaned forward. Maya's finger rested on a timestamp buried deep in the document history. "This version was modified at 2:14 in the morning." Richard frowned. "So?" Maya looked directly at him. "This system was supposed to be locked after midnight." A pulse jumped in the attorney's neck. He quickly opened his laptop. Keys clicked through the silent room. 30 seconds later his face turned pale again. "She is right." The room erupted into anxious whispers. Richard slammed a hand onto the table. The sound cracked through the noise. "Enough." Instantly, everything went quiet. Maya remained calm. But inside, her heart was racing. She knew what came next. She had seen it before. Not in this building. Not with these people. But powerful people always reacted the same way when the truth started climbing toward the surface. They stopped looking for answers and started looking for someone to blame. Richard folded his arms. "You seem very confident for someone pushing a housekeeping cart this morning." The humiliation was deliberate. Several executives looked down. Others watched Maya carefully, waiting for her reaction. She swallowed. "The facts do not care what uniform I am wearing." The answer landed harder than anyone expected. Richard's expression darkened. Before he could respond, the attorney suddenly froze. His eyes locked on the laptop screen. Every drop of color drained from his face. "Richard!" Nobody liked the sound of his voice anymore. "What now?" Richard snapped. The attorney slowly turned the screen around. A digital access log filled the display. Names. Times. Authorization records. One name was highlighted in red. Richard looked down. The room became so quiet that people could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning above them. His eyes moved across the screen. Then stopped. For the first time all morning, genuine shock appeared on his face. Not anger. Not irritation. Shock. Maya saw it immediately. The highlighted name belonged to someone nobody would ever suspect. Someone sitting inside this room. Someone Richard trusted more than anyone else in the company. Slowly, Richard lifted his eyes from the screen and looked across the boardroom. The person staring back at him was already standing. The executive remained standing. Nobody breathed. Nobody looked away. Cold light from the floor-to-ceiling windows washed across the polished table as dozens of eyes locked onto the man Richard Sterling trusted most. Daniel Cross. Chief Financial Officer. 20 years beside him. 20 years of handshakes, board votes, and billion-dollar decisions. Richard stared as if he had never seen him before. "Sit down, Daniel." His voice came out low and dangerous. Daniel did not move. The faint vibration of a phone against the table sounded unnaturally loud. Somewhere near the back of the room, someone quietly started recording. Richard noticed. So did everyone else. The pressure inside the boardroom was becoming impossible to ignore. Daniel slowly adjusted his tie. "You are making a mistake." Maya's eyes narrowed. Not because of what he said. Because of how he said it. Calm. Too calm. The same calm she had seen years ago before another fraud case exploded into national headlines. Richard stepped forward. Then explain why your credentials accessed the contract at 2:14 in the morning. Daniel smiled faintly. It was the wrong expression for the moment. Several executives exchanged nervous looks. Because I was fixing problems nobody else saw. Maya immediately looked down at the contract. Her pulse quickened. The room focused entirely on Daniel, but she was no longer watching him. She was watching the paperwork. Watching the details. Looking for something everyone else had missed. Again. Richard slammed the document onto the table. You altered a board-approved agreement. Daniel's smile disappeared. I protected this company. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Outside the windows, news helicopters circled above downtown Manhattan. Below, reporters were beginning to receive alerts that the merger announcement had been delayed. The story was already leaking. Richard knew it. Every second made the disaster bigger. His empire was beginning to wobble in public view. Daniel finally looked at Maya. This is because of her? The words dripped with disbelief. A hotel maid walks into a boardroom and suddenly everyone forgets 20 years of loyalty? The humiliation was deliberate. Sharp. Public. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Maya felt every eye swing back toward her. Once again she was the outsider. The maid. The woman who did not belong. Daniel pointed directly at her. Do any of you even know why she disappeared from finance? The room froze. Richard's eyes narrowed. Maya's stomach tightened. Daniel saw it. He pressed harder. Tell them, Maya. The silence became suffocating. Her hands remained steady, but inside, old wounds were reopening. Richard looked between them. What is he talking about? Maya did not answer immediately. Daniel took a step forward. Because she was blamed for a failed investigation 6 years ago. Gasps spread around the room. The emotional impact was immediate. Executives who had started believing Maya now looked uncertain. Suspicion crept back into the room. Exactly as Daniel intended. Richard slowly turned toward her. Is that true? Maya felt the weight of every stare. Every assumption. Every judgment she had spent years carrying. Then she nodded once. Yes. The room exploded into whispers. Daniel's confidence returned instantly. There it is. Richard's face hardened. For the first time since reading her credentials, doubt appeared. Maya saw it happen. The same man who had finally started listening was slipping away again. Daniel sensed victory. She failed Richard. People lost millions. She vanished. And now she suddenly appears here? The pressure was crushing. The room felt divided. Half believed Maya. Half wanted a reason not to. But Maya's eyes never left the contract. Because something was wrong. Something nobody else had noticed. Not Richard. Not Daniel. Not the attorneys. Nobody. Her gaze locked onto a small sequence of numbers buried deep in an appendix. The realization hit her like ice water. Her heart stopped for a second. Then started racing. Faster than before. Much faster. She looked up sharply. Daniel did not write the clause. The room went silent. Daniel blinked. Richard froze. Even the attorneys stopped moving. Maya grabbed the contract and flipped to the final pages. You are all looking at the wrong person. Every face in the boardroom turned toward her. The city skyline glowed behind the glass. The helicopters continued circling overhead. Maya's fingers stopped on a single signature line. Her eyes widened. Then she slowly looked toward the far end of the table. Toward someone who had not spoken once all morning. Someone everyone had completely forgotten was even there. Every head turned toward the far end of the table. The silence was suffocating. The soft hum of the ventilation system sounded louder than the city outside. At the edge of the boardroom sat Evelyn Hart, Sterling Technologies' senior legal advisor. She had not spoken once all morning. Not during the arguments. Not during the accusations. Not even when the merger began falling apart in front of everyone. Richard stared at her. Evelyn? The single word carried disbelief. Evelyn did not answer immediately. Her fingers remained folded neatly on the polished table. The reflection of the overhead lights shimmered across her silver watch. Maya felt her pulse hammering in her ears. She had seen that signature before. Years ago. In another investigation. Another disaster. Another room full of powerful people who thought they controlled everything. Richard stepped forward. Tell me she is wrong. His voice cracked slightly. For the first time all day, people noticed. The billionaire who never lost control was beginning to unravel. Camera notifications flashed from phones beneath the table. Investors exchanged nervous looks. Outside, helicopters continued circling. The crisis was no longer private. Evelyn finally lifted her eyes. Calm. Composed. Almost too composed. You should be careful about assumptions, Richard. The answer landed like a punch to the room. Nobody knew what it meant. Not yet. Maya grabbed the contract. Her hands moved quickly now. Every second mattered. The signature is not the issue. The room snapped back toward her. Richard looked exhausted and furious at the same time. Then what is? Maya flipped several pages and pointed to a sequence of reference codes buried in the appendix. Tiny numbers. Easy to ignore. Impossible to notice unless you knew exactly what to look for. These codes were copied from another transaction. Evelyn's expression changed. Barely. But Maya saw it. So did the attorney. The attorney immediately opened his laptop. Keys clicked rapidly through the silence. Sweat glistened along his temple. Richard stood frozen beside him. Nobody sat anymore. Nobody could. The tension was too heavy. 30 seconds passed. Then 40. The attorney stopped typing. His face turned white. Completely white. Richard's stomach dropped before the man even spoke. My God! A chill swept through the room. What? Richard demanded. The attorney slowly rotated the screen. Historical records filled the display. Merger agreements. Offshore entities. Hidden partnerships. Names. Dates. Transactions. Millions of dollars moving through shell companies. Then billions. The room erupted. Investors stood up. Executives started talking over one another. Somebody dropped a phone. Someone else backed away from the table entirely. Richard stared at the screen. His breathing became shallow. This cannot be real. But it was. Every document connected to the same network. Every transaction pointed toward the same destination. And every path ended with one name. Evelyn Hart. The room went silent again. More silent than before. Even Evelyn stopped moving. Richard looked at her as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. 23 years. 23 years she had advised him. Protected him. Helped build the company. He trusted her more than almost anyone. Evelyn. The word barely left his mouth. She looked away. That hurt more than any confession. Maya watched the realization spread through the room. The humiliation was no longer hers. It had shifted. Completely. The people who dismissed her were now staring at the evidence she uncovered. Richard's hands trembled slightly. He hid them behind his back. How much? He asked quietly. Nobody answered. How much? He repeated. The attorney swallowed. His voice sounded distant. If these records are accurate. He paused. Nobody breathed. Over $3 billion. Gasps rippled across the room. Richard closed his eyes. For 1 second, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man watching his entire life collapse. Then something unexpected happened. Evelyn started laughing. Softly at first. Then louder. Every face turned toward her. The sound echoed through the boardroom. Wrong. Completely wrong. Richard opened his eyes. What is so funny? Evelyn slowly stood. The city skyline reflected behind her like broken glass. She looked at Maya. Not Richard. Not the attorneys. Maya. You really think this was the whole story? The smile disappeared from her face. If you had arrived 10 minutes later, Maya. She paused. The room froze. Richard's blood ran cold. Evelyn reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thin black folder. The moment Maya saw it, her heart stopped. She recognized it instantly. Because 6 years ago, that exact folder was the reason her career was destroyed. The black folder seemed to absorb every sound in the room. Evelyn held it with one hand, and suddenly nobody cared about the $3 billion anymore. Nobody cared about the merger. Nobody cared about the reporters gathering outside. Every eye was on Maya. Cold light reflected off the polished conference table. The helicopters outside felt farther away now. Even the endless hum of the city seemed muted. Maya did not move. Her face remained calm, almost frighteningly calm. But inside, memories were waking up. Richard noticed it immediately. For the first time all day, he was not looking at her as a maid. He was looking at her as someone carrying a history nobody in this room understood. Evelyn slowly placed the folder on the table. The soft sound echoed through the silence. Do you remember this? She asked. Maya's gaze never left the folder. Yes. One word. Nothing more. Yet several people around the table shifted uneasily. Richard felt a knot tightening in his stomach. He had spent the last hour watching everything he believed collapse. But now something felt different. Bigger. Older. More dangerous. Evelyn slid the folder forward. Nobody touched it. Nobody wanted to. The room had entered a different kind of tension now. Not chaos. Not panic. Something quieter. Something heavier. A phone vibrated somewhere near the back wall. The sound made several executives flinch. Maya finally stepped forward. Her worn housekeeping shoes barely made a sound against the marble floor. She looked down at the folder for several seconds. Then she gently opened it. A collective breath swept through the room. Inside were photographs. Reports. Internal memoranda. Audit records. Names. Dozens of names. Richard frowned. What is this? Evelyn looked at him. The investigation that destroyed her career. The words landed softly, but they hit harder than any accusation. Richard's eyes returned to Maya. She remained silent. The attorney slowly leaned closer. The deeper he looked into the documents, the paler he became. These dates, he whispered. Maya turned a page. Then another. Her hands never shook. The room watched in complete silence. You were right, she said quietly. Evelyn blinked. For the first time all morning, uncertainty crossed her face. Maya looked up. Most of the evidence was fabricated. Richard stared. The attorney stared. Everyone stared. Maya lowered her eyes to the folder again. But not all of it. The room froze. Evelyn's confidence weakened slightly. Richard noticed. Maya continued turning pages. Slowly. Methodically. Like someone assembling pieces of a puzzle she had never stopped solving. The soft rustle of paper sounded impossibly loud. I spent 6 years believing someone wanted me removed, Maya said. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. I was wrong. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. Richard could hear his own heartbeat. Maya stopped on a single photograph buried near the back of the file. She stared at it for several seconds. Then something changed behind her eyes. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. The attorney saw it immediately. What is it? Maya did not answer. She pulled the photograph free and held it beneath the conference lights. Richard stepped closer. So did the others. It showed a meeting room from 6 years ago. Executives. Auditors. Lawyers. Faces frozen in time. Nothing unusual. At first. Then Richard noticed where Maya was looking. Not at the people. at the reflection in the glass behind them. A reflection almost impossible to see. Almost. The attorney leaned forward. His breath caught. No. Maya's eyes remained locked on the image. Suddenly the entire room felt colder. Evelyn no longer looked comfortable. Her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the table. Richard saw that too. The realization spreading across Maya's face was unlike anything he had witnessed all day. It was not the look of someone finding an answer. It was the look of someone realizing the question itself had been wrong. For 6 years. Maya slowly lowered the photograph. Then she looked toward the boardroom windows where the city stretched beyond the glass. Her reflection stared back at her. Alongside another reflection. A detail she had missed until this exact moment. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Evelyn is not the person who framed me. The silence that followed felt endless. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Maya turned toward the doorway. Toward someone who had quietly entered the boardroom while everyone was focused on the folder. And the moment Richard saw who was standing there, the color drained from his face. The man standing in the doorway did not belong there. That was the first thing everyone felt. The second was worse. Richard Sterling looked as though he had seen a ghost. The boardroom remained frozen. Cold light spilled across the marble floor as the newcomer stepped inside. His polished shoes echoed softly through the silence. Every executive recognized him instantly. Samuel Pierce, former chairman of Sterling Technologies. The man who had retired 6 years earlier. The man Richard publicly credited for building the company. The man nobody expected to see again. Maya did not look surprised. That was what unsettled everyone most. Samuel's eyes settled on her first. Not Richard. Not Evelyn. Her. You finally found it, he said quietly. The words landed like a shockwave. Richard stared between them. You know her? Samuel exhaled slowly. His face looked older than the photographs hanging in the corporate lobby. More tired. More human. I should have listened to her 6 years ago. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Maya remained still. Her hands rested lightly against the black folder. Richard felt the room slipping away from him. What are you talking about? Samuel looked toward the city skyline beyond the windows. Helicopters still circled overhead. Reporters still waited outside. Yet suddenly none of that mattered. The investigation that destroyed Maya's career was never supposed to reach her. The room erupted with whispers. Phones lifted higher. Camera lenses focused. Maya lowered her eyes briefly. Not from shame. From memory. Samuel continued. She discovered irregularities before anyone else. She warned us. Richard's heart pounded harder. The story he thought he understood was dissolving. Piece by piece. And we ignored her, Samuel said. The silence afterward felt painful. Maya remembered the meetings. The warnings. The reports nobody wanted to read. The conversations that ended the moment powerful people became uncomfortable. Samuel's voice grew quieter. Then someone redirected the investigation toward her. Richard slowly looked at Evelyn. Evelyn did not speak. Her confidence was gone now. But Maya already knew something deeper. Evelyn had protected someone. Not herself. Samuel turned toward Maya again. There was regret in his eyes. Genuine regret. You spent 6 years paying for a crime you tried to stop. Nobody laughed now. Nobody questioned her credentials. Nobody looked at her uniform. The humiliation that had followed her into the room had completely vanished. Investors who had dismissed her were staring as though they were watching history correct itself in real time. Richard swallowed hard. The realization was crushing. He remembered ordering security. Remembered the laughter. Remembered every assumption he made within seconds of seeing her. Maya never mentioned any of it. She simply stood there. Calm. Steady. Unshaken. That made it worse. Samuel reached into his coat and removed a thin flash drive. The tiny piece of metal caught the light. The entire room focused on it. I kept this for 6 years. Maya's eyes narrowed. Samuel slowly placed it on the conference table. Nobody touched it. Because I was afraid of what would happen if the truth came out. Richard stared at the drive. What truth? Samuel's gaze shifted toward him. The answer came softly. The person behind all of this was never inside legal. The room tightened again. A new wave of tension swept through the boardroom. Evelyn closed her eyes. Richard noticed. Maya noticed too. Samuel looked at Maya. You were looking in the wrong direction because that is exactly where they wanted you to look. Maya felt something click into place. A missing piece. The final missing piece. Her pulse accelerated. Slowly she reached for the flash drive. No hesitation. No fear. Just certainty. The attorney immediately moved toward a laptop. The room gathered closer. Even Richard stepped forward. Nobody spoke as the drive connected. A soft electronic tone echoed through the silence. One folder appeared on the screen. One video file. The timestamp was 6 years old. Maya's reflection stared back at her from the dark monitor. Samuel's voice was barely above a whisper. Everything is in there. The attorney clicked the file. The screen flickered. Static filled the room. Then an image began to appear. Maya's breath caught. Richard's face went pale. Because sitting at the center of the video was someone neither of them expected to see. The video stabilized. Nobody spoke. Nobody even shifted in their seats. The only sound was the faint hum of the laptop fan and the distant vibration of helicopters beyond the glass. Then the image sharpened. A conference room. 6 years earlier. Maya immediately recognized it. Her stomach tightened. The room on the screen looked almost identical to the one she was standing in now. Same polished table. Same cold lighting. Same powerful people deciding the fate of others. Richard leaned closer. The glow of the monitor reflected across his face. Then the figure at the center of the video turned toward the camera. A collective gasp swept through the boardroom. Richard staggered back half a step. Samuel Pierce closed his eyes. Evelyn lowered her head. The person on the screen was not Maya. Not Evelyn. Not Daniel. It was Richard himself. 6 years younger. 6 years more confident. 6 years before everything started unraveling. The silence became unbearable. Maya stared at the screen without blinking. The recording continued. Richard watched his younger self reviewing reports. Signing approvals. Listening to presentations. Then Maya appeared in the footage. Younger. Nervous. Determined. She stood before the board and presented evidence of financial irregularities. The room and the video dismissed her almost immediately. Several executives laughed. One interrupted her repeatedly. Another rolled his eyes. Nobody wanted to hear bad news. Nobody wanted complications. Maya remembered every second of it. The humiliation returned like an old scar. Yet, she remained completely still. Then came the moment nobody expected. The younger Richard looked directly at her report. He hesitated. For just a second. Long enough to understand she might be right. The entire boardroom watching the video saw it. Richard saw it too. The realization hit him harder than any accusation. He had known. Maybe not everything. But enough. Enough to ask more questions. Enough to stop what came next. Yet he never did. The video continued. Another executive spoke. Investors were nervous. Deadlines were approaching. Delays would cost millions. Richard looked away from the report. Then the meeting moved on. Maya disappeared from the discussion. Like she was never there. Like her warning never mattered. The screen went dark. Nobody moved. Nobody rushed to speak. The emotional weight settling across the room felt almost physical. Richard stared at the blank monitor. His reflection stared back. Older now. More tired. Less certain. The attorney slowly closed the laptop. Even that small sound felt loud. Maya remained standing near the table. The housekeeping badge still hung from her uniform. The same badge that had made people dismiss her only hours ago. Yet nobody was looking at the badge anymore. Investors looked at her differently now. Executives looked at her differently. Even the security guards standing near the door had changed. The judgment was gone. Replaced by something else. Respect. Samuel finally broke the silence. She tried to save all of us. No one argued. No one could. Richard's throat tightened. He remembered the first thing he said when he saw her that morning. Get security. The words felt unbearable now. He slowly turned toward Maya. The room followed him. Every eye. Every camera. Every witness. Maya met his gaze calmly. No anger. No triumph. Somehow that made everything worse. Richard swallowed. I was wrong. The admission barely rose above a whisper. Yet it echoed through the room. Investors looked stunned. Nobody could remember the last time Richard Sterling admitted fault in public. He took another step toward her. I should have listened then. Maya said nothing. Richard looked down briefly. Then back at her. And I should have listened today. The room seemed to exhale. Years of misunderstanding collapsed into a single moment. Yet Maya's expression never changed. Because she knew something nobody else knew. Something still unresolved. Something bigger than blame. Bigger than apologies. Her eyes drifted toward the dark laptop screen. Toward the reflection hidden within it. A detail everyone else had missed. Again. Samuel noticed the change in her face immediately. What is it? Maya remained silent for several seconds. Then she slowly reached for the black folder. Her fingers stopped on one final document buried at the very bottom. A document nobody had opened. Not once. The room became still again. Richard felt the knot return to his stomach. Maya lifted the page into the light. The color drained from her face for the first time all day. And when she finally looked up, her eyes were fixed on someone standing across the room. The room followed Maya's gaze. Slowly. Almost reluctantly. Nobody wanted another surprise. Nobody thought there could be one left. Yet the silence told a different story. Cold afternoon light stretched across the boardroom floor. The helicopters outside had drifted farther away. Even the city seemed quieter now. Maya held the final document carefully between her fingers. The paper trembled slightly. Not from fear. From realization. Richard watched her. The same woman he had ordered security to remove only hours earlier now stood at the center of every answer. The irony was impossible to ignore. Maya lowered her eyes to the page one last time. Then she smiled. It was small. Almost invisible. But it changed everything. Samuel noticed first. What is it? Maya looked around the room. At the investors. At the attorneys. At Evelyn. At Richard. Faces that had judged her. Faces that now waited for her. It is over, she said softly. Nobody understood. Not yet. She placed the final document on the table. The attorney stepped forward and read it. Then read it again. A slow breath escaped his lips. Relief. Genuine relief. Richard frowned. What does it say? The attorney looked up. For the first time all day, there was no panic in his eyes. The transfer was never completed. The room froze. Then slowly, confusion gave way to understanding. The hidden structure. The offshore accounts. The shell entities. The entire scheme had been built. Prepared. Positioned. But never fully activated. The final authorization had never occurred. Samuel closed his eyes. Evelyn exhaled shakily. Years of fear seemed to leave her shoulders all at once. Richard stared at the document. Then at Maya. Then back again. $3 billion had nearly vanished. Careers had nearly been destroyed. Lives had nearly been rewritten. And the only reason they were standing here now was because one woman refused to stay silent. A woman nobody had wanted to hear. The room remained still. Nobody cheered. Nobody applauded. The moment was too heavy for that. The attorney quietly closed the folder. One by one, phones lowered. Cameras stopped recording. Even the investors who had been whispering all afternoon sat in silence. Something deeper than victory had settled over the room. Maya looked toward the windows. The sunlight had changed. Warmer now. Softer. The city below continued moving as if none of this had happened. Richard slowly stepped forward. The sound of his shoes echoed across the marble floor. He stopped a few feet from her. For several seconds he said nothing. The billionaire who always had an answer suddenly had none. Maya waited patiently. Richard glanced down at the housekeeping badge hanging from her uniform. Then back at her face. The contrast hit him harder than anything else. He remembered what he saw that morning. A maid. A distraction. Someone who did not belong. He shook his head slightly. Ashamed. Ms. Williams. The room became perfectly still. Nobody had heard him call her that before. Richard swallowed. I spent the entire day trying to remove the most important person in this building. Maya said nothing. She did not need to. Richard extended his hand. Not as a billionaire. Not as a chairman. Simply as a man who finally understood how wrong he had been. Maya looked at his hand for a moment. Then she took it. The gesture lasted only seconds. Yet it felt larger than every board vote, contract, and merger discussed in that room. Around them, nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The power in the room had changed completely. Not because Maya demanded it. Because she earned it. She released his hand gently and gathered the worn folder she had carried all day. The same folder nobody wanted to see that morning. As she turned toward the door, Richard spoke again. His voice was quieter now. What happens next? Maya paused. Warm light reflected across the glass walls behind her. She looked toward the skyline. Then back at him. The truth already did its job. Richard lowered his eyes. There was nothing left to argue with. Maya walked toward the exit. Her footsteps were soft against the marble floor. No security guards approached. No one laughed. No one questioned why she was there. The doors opened. She stepped into the golden light of the hallway beyond. Behind her, an entire room of powerful people remained standing in silence. And for the first time all day, nobody noticed the uniform she was wearing. They only remembered the woman who wore it.